Hello, I'm Jim Owens, and I'm the Shelby and Mustang Marketing Manager for Ford Performance. And we're here today to talk a little bit about that 760 horsepower Shelby GT500. With me today is Jeff Grauer, who is the development engineer for Ford Performance, who helped make this vehicle what it is. 760 horsepower, sub 11 second quarter mile. What we have here is a vehicle that is the all-out performance Mustang. You know, a lot of you might have looked and seen, hey, I'm missing that third pedal, and I don't have that gear shift in there. And, you know, Carroll Shelby back in the 60s didn't sit there and say, my name's Carroll Shelby and manual transmission performance is my business. What he said was performance was his business. So when you are looking at that Shelby GT500 and you wonder why there's not a third pedal and the gear shift on there, that is because the men and women of Ford Performance, along with Tremec, put in this 7-speed dual clutch transmission, allowing faster track times and better opportunity to drive and experience the performance. And so, Jeff, I was wondering if we wanted to talk a little bit about some of the things that you worked with and your team worked with on that Tremec transmission from a Ford Performance standpoint to put those attributes in.
Sure, absolutely. Let's talk first about what is a dual clutch transmission. It is not an automatic in the typical sense, and it is not a manual, but it gives you the best of both worlds. Unlike a regular torque converter automatic, it still uses the internals of a manual transmission with a clutch system, but it's all automated. So the dual clutch means that it has one clutch on the odd gears and another clutch on the even gears. So 1, 3, 5, 7 is one clutch, 2, 4, 6 in reverse is the second shaft and the second clutch. Those two shafts can always be ready to go, so gear changes can happen lightning fast, unlike a regular manual and unlike a torque converter automatic, as fast as 80 milliseconds. Those shifts are happening so fast, and there's not only no torque interruption like you would have in a regular transmission, but we can actually bump the torque during those shifts in some cases. When you're braking, starting to turn into that corner, it knows, based on the sensors in the car, how fast you're decelerating, how fast you're going around that corner. It has the right gear selected, so when you come out of that corner, it is in the optimal gear, and even as a professional driver, running it in manual mode, they won't do anything different than the transmission will do in automatic mode.
So it'll make me feel at the end of the day, not only like I am faster going around a road course, but that I am actually faster going around the road course.
Absolutely, you will be.
So you talked a little bit about the torque converter before. Can you tell me a little bit why we don't need one necessarily on the 7-speed dual clutch?
Sure, unlike a regular automatic that uses a torque converter, this is more like a manual with these clutches. So the torque is transmitted directly from the engine through the transmission to the rear axle and into the tires in the most efficient possible way. You don't have that delay and that, your hopes and dreams, your hopes and dreams vanish waiting for the transmission to shift, like a lot of regular automatics can have. There's no sag, there's no all the fun governor that is the torque converter isn't present.
Right in there when I get on the accelerator, then it goes directly to it.
It's so intelligent. Speeds everything up to the point where you're going to get great performance. It's a lot of fun to drive. Those rev match downshifts are just exhilarating. They're so much fun to listen to, and it's just, they make me giggle and smile every time I dive deep into a corner and hear that engine just blip off downshifts.
So Jeff is going to get behind the wheel of the Shelby GT500, something I know that all of you would like to do, and explain to you some of the technology that the men and women of Ford Performance have engineered into the car.
First and foremost, always buckle up. In the GT500, we've got 5 drive modes. They're normal, sport, track, drag, and slippery mode. Normal mode is, just like it sounds, the mode that you would use when you're doing normal driving. It combines smooth shifting, good fuel economy, soft suspension, steering, fairly quiet exhaust, and this is the mode you're going to use most of the time when you're in the car. When you switch to sport mode, quite a few things change. Your cluster, for example, will go to a different cluster screen. The transmission in sport mode is going to delay upshifts. It's going to be a more visceral mode where the shifts will be crisper, they'll be a little louder, you'll get more feel in the shifts. The steering will get tighter, and your brake controls will also change a little bit to be a little bit sportier than in normal mode. Next up is track mode. Track mode, as it sounds, is to be used on the racetrack. It is not a street mode. It was specifically designed to be the best possible performance on the racetrack. Rather than being just another step up from sport mode, we didn't tune it that way at all. It's actually, in some ways, softer than normal mode. The throttle control is actually more linear in track mode than it is in sport mode. This is done on purpose. On the racetrack, you want to be able to make fine adjustments with your accelerator to really control the vehicle in corners. From a transmission standpoint, it knows exactly what you're going to do next on the racetrack. When you go into a corner, it's going to snap off downshifts, and it's going to be ready to go. When you come out of that corner, it will be in the right gear for that corner. On the straightaways, it's going to shift right at red line under wide open throttle, and it's always going to be in the right gear. In fact, when you drive this car in manual mode versus in automatic mode in track, you will get virtually identical lap times in auto mode because the car senses everything that's going on, and it is intelligent enough to always be in the right gear at the right time. We've put professional drivers in the car in auto mode and in manual mode in track. Their lap times are virtually identical. Part of track mode is that again, your cluster will change to specific track screen, and your suspension will go into the firmest setting. Again, not a street mode, it will go into a setting that is best for the racetrack. Brake controls are again set up to be safe, but they won't get in the way of an experienced driver on the racetrack. They'll let you slide the car around without intervening, but if you slide a little bit too much, it will intervene gently and straighten your car back out. On your dash, there will be a telltale that stays up, reminding you that the brake controls are in a different state to give you this extra latitude on the racetrack. Next up, we have drag mode. Again, this is an off-road mode. It is not meant for the street. It's meant for the drag strip. Drag mode is optimized for straight line down the drag strip to get you the best possible performance. It works with the suspension. The suspension actually softens up the rear, lets the front lift so you get best weight transfer in drag mode to get the best possible times down the drag strip. The transmission also is set up to give the best possible performance. You'll get OVERTORQUE shifts. These give you the best possible performance at the drag strip. It will shift right at red line. And last, we've got slippery mode. Slippery mode is an on-road mode that is used if it's raining. Hopefully you don't drive your car in the snow, but snowing. This mode, the transmission is set up to do the smoothest possible shifts. It will select high gears to really give you the best possible traction in these low grip conditions. To go along with this, we've limited a few features in slippery mode because it's really meant to give you the safest possible experience in slippery conditions on the road. In track and drag mode, an OVERTORQUE shift actually uses the inertia of the engine to boost acceleration. So kind of like power shifting a manual transmission where you shift without lifting, the dual clutch transmission will do that, and it won't damage any of the hardware. It's designed specifically to do that. So it actually uses the inertia of the engine to give you a bump in acceleration. You can actually feel it in the car. When you shift, you'll get a little bump in the back, and it's actually giving you extra performance in a straight line. You don't, however, want this bump in performance in a corner. Luckily, the car is smart enough. It has sensors everywhere. It knows when you're cornering. It calms down those shifts in a corner so it doesn't disrupt the chassis at all. You can shift this car right at the apex, not the right thing to do, coming out of a corner, wherever you want on the track. The transmission knows enough to know not to give it that bump while you're cornering so it doesn't upset the chassis. You'll get the best possible performance on the racetrack with this OVERTORQUE shift. It'll only do it when you're in a straight line, almost in a straight line in the corners. It backs it off just enough so you'll get maximum performance without any disruption to the chassis. One of the cool features is the magnesium paddles. Yes, they're real magnesium paddles. They've got a lot of things that these things can do. They're not just typical upshift on the right, downshift on the left. Everybody knows that. They can do other things, like, for instance, if I'm in a low gear and I want to go to the highest possible gear, I can just simply press and hold the right paddle. It'll go to the highest gear that the transmission will let me go to. Likewise, if I'm in a high gear and I want to go down either for maximum acceleration or if I just want to get to a low gear for deceleration, I can simply press and hold the left paddle. It will take me to the lowest possible gear. One great feature of this transmission in this car is that these paddles are hardwired directly to the transmission control module, bypassing all the car's normal electronic channels to give you the fastest possible response time. When I pull that paddle, I'm getting an immediate response out of the transmission. There's no delay. Another thing, I can press and hold both paddles and it will put me into what we call a temporary neutral mode. I can press and hold both paddles, rev the engine, and it's just like I'm pushing in the clutch on a manual transmission. So I don't have to go down to the gear shift module, turn it to the N to be able to rev the engine. I can simply pull and hold both paddles, rev the engine. If I let go, the transmission will actually pull the engine speed back down, synchronize the speeds, and I'm on my way again without getting any kind of a jerk when I let go of the paddles. We can also pull and hold the paddles to be able to do a stationary burnout. I'll explain how that works. In either track mode or drag mode, at the drag strip only, not to be used on the street, you can actually turn traction control off, pull and hold both paddles, put your right foot all the way to the floor and hold it there. It'll bang off the rev limiter, but your pedal has to be all the way on the floor. When you release both paddles, it will spike the clutches, spin the tires, and then you can modulate it with your brake like you would in a normal automatic transmission. So you can do a two-footed burnout. If you leave traction control on, rather than getting wheel spin, you'll get a hard launch. If you want full manual control of the transmission, you could put it into manual mode. In the center of the gear shift module, there's an M. Just press that while you're in drive. It will put you in manual mode. You'll get a telltale in the cluster where you'll get a set of paddles around the gear indicator telling you that you're in manual mode. At that point, you have full control of the transmission through the paddles. I can upshift, downshift, I can bang it off the rev limiter if I don't shift at red line. You've got full control of the transmission at that point. One exception is at the drag strip. At the drag strip, there's really no time where you'd ever want to bang it off the rev limiter at the drag strip. So we automatically upshift right at red line at the optimal time. So if you want to shift and you're a little bit late pulling the paddle, it'll take care of you. It'll upshift at the optimal time. So Live and Drive is a temporary manual mode. So if I'm driving down the road, I want to pass somebody and I want to be in a specific gear, or if I'm on a windy road and there's a bunch of corners come up and I want to have some fun in manual mode, I don't have to actually put it into manual mode. I can have a temporary manual mode, what we call Live and Drive. So if I pull a paddle, it will put me into Live and Drive. And then as long as I have steering input, braking input, or keep changing gears, a timer will keep resetting and it will keep me in Live and Drive. Once the road straightens out and I'm not turning or decelerating or accelerating hard, it will time out, revert me right back into automatic mode. One difference in this mode is that unlike true manual mode, it will upshift at the red line. In case I'm driving along, I put it into live and drive, I forget that I'm in live and drive, and I put my foot to the floor, it's not going to bang off the rev limiter like it would in manual mode, where I'm consciously putting it in a mode that will do that. If you have to be towed, there's a couple different scenarios that might happen. One is if the car is running, and one if the car is not running. We use a different method. If the car is running, if you got a flat tire, for example, and you're stuck on a narrow road, a bridge, somewhere with no shoulder, and you need to quickly be pushed or pulled off the road, we're going to utilize what's called press and hold in neutral. So I'm going to turn the gear shift module to neutral, and then I'm going to press and hold the M button in the center of that gear shift module. The N LED will blink, telling me that I'm in this neutral mode. And at that point, I'm in neutral. I can actually shut off the car if I need to. I can leave it on for if I need steering, but I can shut it off if I need to. The car can then be pushed or pulled a short distance until you can safely be towed away or restarted, fix your flat, whatever the issue might be. If we use the press and hold in the transmission, the battery will slowly draw power because the transmission control module needs to stay awake while this mode is in place. So if the vehicle needs to be towed and it's going to take a little while, say the flatbed needs to take your car back to the dealer or something, chances are good it will take over a half an hour, which is the timeout that this feature has so that it doesn't kill the battery, and it will put itself back into park. At that point, the car won't be able to be unloaded. If the engine isn't running, if you ran out of gas or for some reason the engine isn't running and you need to be pushed, pulled, towed, whatever, the transmission doesn't have pressure to be able to put itself into neutral mode. So then we have to utilize what we call the manual parking release. That is located in the console. When you lift the lid, on the left side, there's a little tab here. You pull the tab out, you'll see an orange strap, and you're gonna pull this. You'll get a ding out of the cluster, which tells you that it put the parking brake on. Anytime you pull that, it puts the parking brake on so the car can't roll away. Put your foot on the brake, push the parking brake back down to remove the parking brake. Now the vehicle can safely be pushed or pulled. If you need to have it towed by a flatbed, or if for whatever reason it's going to be longer than 30 minutes, you'll always want to use this pull from park, the manual method. That way it will stay in neutral, and if it's on a flatbed, it can be unloaded once it gets to the dealer and it'll still be in neutral mode. The only time you should flat tow this vehicle is at a racetrack, just to get into the pits. Keep the speeds below 20 miles per hour and keep it as short as possible. You don't ever want to flat tow this vehicle with either the manual parking release or the press and hold method. You'll always want to use a flatbed, except in the case of getting it off to the side of the road where you can use a flatbed, or to tow it back into the pits if you're at a racetrack. There's a few things about the dual clutch transmission that are different than a typical torque converter automatic that you need to be aware of. One of those things is starting on a hill. If you're in traffic at a red light, for example, and you're on a hill, a regular torque converter automatic is pretty happy just to use the engine to hold the vehicle from rolling back. It's not going to hurt anything with a regular automatic. This transmission acts more like a manual transmission. So if you're using the engine to hold the vehicle from rolling, it's just like using the clutch on a regular manual, which you know you shouldn't do because it adds a bunch of heat into the system. So it's always best to hold your foot on the brake. When the light turns green, traffic starts to go, take your foot off the brake, then you can accelerate, and it won't add that extra heat into the clutches. The transmission will protect itself, but it's always best not to add that extra heat. Another situation to be aware of is very slow traffic. There's a few scenarios where this could apply. Either really heavy city traffic where you are barely moving, could be at a staging lane at the drag strip where it's going to take you quite a while, you're barely moving. Or if you happen to have your GT500 in a parade to show it off to everybody, you know parades move very slowly. In all three of those cases, the clutches will add some heat if you're barely crawling. So what is best to do is to try to use a stop and go method rather than a steady, very slow crawl. So what you'll want to do is just hold the brake when traffic gives you a little bit of room, let go of the brake, move a little bit, and then back onto the brake, rather than trying to stay at a 1 to 2 mile an hour crawl. That's just adding undue heat into the system. Again, the vehicle will protect itself, but it's best not to add that heat. If you hear sort of a hissing sound when you're at a stop or at very low speeds, this isn't a cause for concern. It's just the transmission pumping cooling fluid into the clutches, which just so happens to be more evident at low speeds without any road or wind noise present. So remember, this hissing sound is perfectly normal at low speeds. It's just fluid going through the transmission to cool the clutches.
Thanks, Jeff, for taking us through all of the things in regards to that DCT transmission that helps make that Shelby GT500 not only great on the road, but so much better and faster on the road course and the drag strip. I want to thank everybody at the Ford Performance team for building a car that will live up to the legend of Carroll Shelby. And remember, buckle up, be safe, and make sure you have fun.